Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man. Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I am your host, Ben Pakulski, and this is the Muscle Expert Podcast. Today, we welcome Dr. Dwayne Jackson, and Dwayne is an absolute legend in the research field, and you guys need to pay attention to this podcast because he's going to dive deep on stress and how that's massively influencing your body composition and your gains. And not only is it, we've heard it before, stress matters, but he's going to tell you why and exactly what you're doing wrong and what everyone is doing wrong and how to improve it. This is a deep dive in understanding the autonomic nervous system and how that plays a massive role in your body's ability to build muscle. So we all struggle with building muscle. We all struggle with losing fat. And Dr. Dwayne is going to teach you strategies to mitigate the autonomic nervous system's response that is slowing down your progress. You're going to want to listen all the way through because we get into some personal deep dives right at the end. Enjoy your episode. Man, so tell me what you're going to enlighten us on today. I know we kind of narrowed it down, but.
Yeah, so I kind of put together a little thing, basically proposing a hypothesis that our approach to bodybuilding is going to be imbalanced, or it's likely an imbalance in our sympathovagal system.
I already know where you're going, man, or at least I think I do, and I fucking can't wait to hear all about it. I'm just going to sit here like a kid in a candy store and let you steer the shit, man.
Okay, so I'll just kind of I'll go into kind of what I've put together as a hypothesis and a few I put together a few key points from a few studies that kind of support what I'm thinking, but I think it will fall really well in line with what you're trying to accomplish with this brain hacking and stuff that you're trying to do, because a lot of the stuff in bodybuilding and strength sports has always been associated with intensity, aggression, focus, power, determination, hard work. But it's funny because all these states of mind that we push every day on our socials and within even in the supplement science community, they're actually states of elevated arousal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Dude, I'm so grateful you're talking about this stuff.
Why didn't we have this earlier?
So I've talked about it on podcasts before, I think, but not obviously to the level you are. This is amazing.
Yeah. So this elevated intensity and aggression and focus that we're all trying to achieve when we work out are all conditions of heightened arousal. Yep. And they require us tipping our neurochemical balance in the direction of stress or fight or flight. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in order for us to actually get in this state, it requires us to ramp this sympathetic nervous system up and actually ramp down the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
Which tips the balance toward high sympathetic activity. And this doesn't only contribute to pathologies like hypertension and increased ventricular mass and all these kind of things in the heart. But sympathetic nervous system responses actually drive catabolism. So, or the breakdown of the body. So when you think about it, right? When you're going into a state of stress or a state of anxiety, you're actually in your body's put itself in a position to break down things so that it can either get away or fight that stress. And so it's kind of funny because we're always talking about catabolism being the enemy and anabolism being our friend. No. On the other hand, the parasympathetic nervous system, or the PNS, is an anabolic system. It actually optimizes absorption and digestion of food, slows the heart rate, and these kind of things.
Right.
So it's strange that we aren't promoting these mindful activities that strengthen the PNS, as well as as anabolism during this time. So that's kind of where I want to go with this.
Man, roll. This is fucking beautiful. So this is literally where my book, I got to write this book, but I don't know who's doing the research on there. You and I are going to write a book together. This is literally it, man. Because I tell all my clients, I said, on our first coaching call, the first thing out of my mouth is our objective is to be in sympathetic for 2 hours a day, tops, and 22 hours a day in parasympathetic, and whatever that looks like. And it starts with the instant you leave the gym, we need to take 5 minutes to set our brain into some type of calming, relaxed, meditative state, whether that be something we do biochemically or something we do psychologically that allows our body to immediately switch into being in a more parasympathetic state.
Absolutely. So it's kind of funny because, I mean, when the listeners hear this, they're going to think that we actually sat down and scripted this. But the fact of the matter is you're actually preempting everything I want to say. Because one of the things that people don't understand or don't generally consider when they think of the sympathetic nervous system is that both the PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system are operating simultaneously at rest.
Okay.
And so I mean, both systems do have to be there. And they do have to be operating. And most people think the sympathetic nervous system is only activated during stress. This isn't the case. In fact, the sympathetic nervous system is in tune with every single heartbeat that our body feels. Okay. And this is called the Baroreflex. Yep. And that's how it tunes it to it. So the Baroreflex is actually how we can regulate blood pressure when we move from, say, laying down supine to standing. Because when we lay down, our venous return to the heart is augmented by our posture, as gravity is not working against the heart in that position. But when we stand up, gravity pulls the blood toward the toes, which then serves to lower blood pressure. And our sympathetic nervous system ramps up in this condition to constrict arterioles in the periphery, elevate heart rate, and promote reestablishment of blood pressure through increases in peripheral resistance and in inactive tissues that increase cardiac output to the heart. Mm-hmm. During exercise, we actually see this whole system ramp up. And that's because the higher brain centers actually reset the baroreflex so that we're allowed or enabled to operate at high sympathetic nerve activities despite the fact that blood pressure's up. So that way we can actually get the blood perfusion that we need when our muscles are active and when there's high levels of constriction. So it is a normal response, but the problem is in a lot of cases we try to actually just augment that sympathetic response so much that we actually become stressed. So do you want me to go through the stress response in a basic sense?
I do, yeah, because that was actually what I was going to say. When you say we become stressed, is that at all levels? Is that the sympathetic response turns into a neurochemical response, which turns into a physiological response? Like, just if you want to walk through it, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely,
I'd like to understand what that looks like.
Yeah, so the actual autonomic nervous system stress response is very well established in our bodies. Evolution has given us a remarkable ability to perceive threats and act on them faster than we can actually consciously interpret them.
Right.
So as we interact with our environment using our senses, with touch, vision, hearing, the amygdala in the brain processes this information in an emotional type of context. And if our environmental cues are perceived as a danger, then the amygdala informs the hypothalamus, or the lower brain centers, by sending a distress signal, basically. And the hypothalamus can be thought of as, say, a command center. It communicates with the rest of the body via the autonomic nervous system, so the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And this is essentially the lizard brain that everybody talks about today. So it's through the hypothalamus and the autonomic nervous system that our brain is able to interact with our bodies. So the autonomic nervous system controls involuntary body functions like blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, blood flow, and these kind of things.
Right.
And like I've said, there's two subsystems of that autonomic nervous system: the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. I'll refer to the parasympathetic nervous system as the PNS a lot of times today, and the sympathetic nervous system as the SNS.
Okay.
So in a general context, you can think of the SNS as the body's gas pedal. When it's activated, it produces what we call fight or flight responses. And this stress response is catabolic. So meaning that it actually breaks things down to provide a rapid and sustained shot of energy needed to overcome whatever dangers you may be perceiving.
Right.
In direct contrast, the PNS counters sympathetic responses to produce what we generally call a rest and digest environment. So it's more associated with anabolism, absorption, and level-headedness. When we activate the sympathetic nervous system, peripheral sympathetic nerves release neurotransmitters One of the primary ones is noradrenaline or norepinephrine. And we also release these compounds called neuropeptides. And one of the ones that I study a lot in my lab is called neuropeptide Y. And these transmitters are released as co-transmitters from sympathetic nerves that service the blood vessels, the heart, and a number of different organs. As well as they also release adrenaline from the adrenal glands and the kidneys.
Yep.
So at the same time this is all going on, the parasympathetic nervous system is withdrawing. So at any resting period, we have a balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic, and when we perceive a threat, parasympathetic withdrawal happens, and then sympathetic nervous system activity goes up.
Okay.
And in this initial response, you get dilated pupils, your airways dilates, you get more air, and your blood pressure goes up. And this is a preparation to fight or flee, right? So you're seeing more, you're hearing more, you're smelling more, you're breathing more. So it gives you a chance to actually be at high alert. And if this state of heightened arousal persists, then the hypothalamus will activate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, which many of us heard of. And this area consists of the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands.
Yep.
And so as the stress prevails, the HPA axis is activated, and then it acts like placing a cinder block on the proverbial gas pedal, if you will. So activation of this axis causes the hypothalamus to release a substance called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH, which activates the pituitary gland in the brain to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, which then subsequently travels to the adrenal glands to lead to the release of cortisol. And that's what everybody understands as this catabolic hormone.
Yep.
In this state, we are now in high alert, in a very high alert. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone, which is synthesized from cholesterol in the adrenal cortex, so in the kidneys, and it's expressed in high levels after bouts of fasting and these kind of things. So we generally see high levels early in the morning anyway in humans. And because cortisol is a circulating hormone, it influences the entire body. So its most notable targets are going to be involved in metabolism and immunity. So once we get these cortisol levels flying in the body with high stress, from a metabolic perspective, the cortisol works actually against insulin. So it promotes increased blood glucose via increased gluconeogenesis, or glucose production, and it also increases glycogen synthesis in the liver. So you end up with this kind of high state of sugar availability, and it's really there to get you through this time of stress. Because our evolutionary processes kind of put this in place for us for when we're getting chased by a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger or something like that, right?
Not sitting in your car flipping somebody off. Where exactly. You're sitting on your ass. Right.
Exactly. So we end up with these situations where our body is actually producing a whole pile of glucose. So you can think of the high cortisol levels being counterintuitive for dieting and these kind of things too for bodybuilders and athletes.
Yeah, for sure.
Beyond that, the cortisol response also causes immunosuppression. And so, in a basic sense, it blocks T lymphocytes, which are a key player in immunity. And they basically won't respond to their signals from the cytokines like interleukins that turn them on. So we end up mounting less of an immune response. So under these stress conditions. And we also get some anti-inflammatory effects, and that's why people, probably are thinking, cortisone treatment and these kind of things. So you will block. It does block histamine secretion, so we do see anti-inflammatory effects. So that also helps with mobility and these kind of things under stressful conditions.
Yep.
So I guess that kind of sets the stage for if you're having a perceived stress that maybe is not really necessary. Then you can see that it sets up an internal neurochemical environment and a hormonal environment that may not be conducive to muscle growth or absorption.
Yeah, completely. And the first thing that's coming to mind, I'm sure you're going to touch on this, is like, what does it look like when it's coming down? So if I get into it, maybe I shouldn't even pull you off track here, but if I'm training hard, so one of the reasons I think this is so valuable is because so many people go to the gym and their only solution is working hard. And I'm like, God, that's the dumbest thing ever, because That may work for you today. That might work for you tomorrow. But a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, if your only solution is I'm going to work harder and harder and harder, then you have to, by definition, be producing more inflammatory hormones and more cortisol. By definition, if your only solution is I'm going to work harder, it's just accumulation. And eventually, you have to do so much that there's got to be this point where your anabolic stimulus will be outweighed by your catabolic stimulus.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And that's actually so the normal exercise response, like you said, is actually a stress response. And so the couple hours you're in the gym, you're going to see elevated levels of catecholamines. And this is a good thing because not only will it produce energy and all those effects that you need to get through the workout, but it'll mobilize fats and do all these kind of things that we want to achieve when we're actually training. But what normally happens is we get this global increase in sympathetic nerve activity by this resetting of the baroreflex that I talked about earlier, during exercise. And this actually allows the body to elevate cardiac output and perfusion and gets us to perform. And then immediately after training, those responses drop off or should drop off.
Right.
However, a lot of the behaviors that we undergo as athletes actually don't enable us to have this drop off of catecholamines and transmitters, sympathetic transmitters after exercise. They actually prevail, giving us almost like what we see in people who have PTSD. So PTSD is a condition where people get these elevated stress hormones and they just won't come down.
Right.
We see similar responses under certain conditions in athletes. And I'll kind of touch on a couple of habits that I think tip the balance toward high sympathetic nerve activity even after we train. And there are a couple key ones. And being a supplement expert also, this goes into how we or transcribes into how we formulate our supplements so that we don't promote these elevations that a lot of companies do see.
Absolutely.
So first off, everybody should be asking, okay, so I take a pre-workout, and that obviously has caffeine in it or some sort of stimulant. And this, in the odd time, you'll feel kind of sketchy while you work out. And although caffeine is the safest and most widely enjoyed stimulant worldwide, studies have shown, and one study shown relatively recently in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology, illustrated that superdosing caffeine pre-workout, so 400 milligrams or greater per serving in the pre-workout period, will significantly prolong an elevated sympathetic drive after training. And this disrupts this sympathovagal balance that we've been talking about.
So is that the lowest dose they tried, or is that where the minimum dose they saw that result? Because from my experience, it has to be an individual thing. Like if I don't take caffeine and all of a sudden I take 200 milligrams, I'm wrecked. But
absolutely,
then maybe my parasympathetic nervous system is more able to balance it out, or is it just 400 milligrams is kind of the tipping point?
No, with caffeine. Well, first of all, caffeine is a body weight dependent drug. So right off the bat, the people who are 100 pounds versus someone who's 200 pounds is going to get twice the effect.
Gotcha.
And then we also have to deal with the fact that there's habituation to taking these compounds. So people who have taken caffeine for their whole life are obviously going to be less sensitive than someone who's trying it for the first time.
Right.
What we generally see though is that the caffeine produces this inverted U effect, and you've probably heard of before. Where you get these great benefits, and then there's a point of diminishing returns as you increase dose.
Yep.
And we find that in the general population, generally speaking, so yes, very general, anything above 300 milligrams in a single serving tends to tip more people toward that inverted U effect than being beneficial.
Okay.
So that's precisely why when we created our products with caffeine, we kept our dosing below 300 milligrams in each serving, because by the time you get everything into you for pre and intra workout, you're still under the 400 milligram kind of threshold. So we find that there is a threshold, but it depends on your sensitivity. Absolutely. So everybody's a little bit different. But the one thing we do know is that you can tell when you're taking caffeine when you've tipped over. You finish your training, you're still very, very hyped, exactly. You're driving along, giving people the finger at the lights and, being a complete jerk. These are all the psychological effects that you don't want to get, because you're actually seeing this heightened sympathetic drive.
Right. So talk about, we're going to the gym and most people are going to hashtag kill it today, right? Most people worked hard by their own perception. The cumulative effect of, obviously I'm going to speculate, the more highly trained you are, the more neurological stress you're inflicting on yourself, and adding on top of that, the stimulatory effect of these, pre-workout stimulants, getting into, understanding how much of a stress that really is to your body. And, I want to kind of walk down the path of having the listeners understand, even though, people think they need these stimulants, how much of an actual stress is it on their sympathetic nervous system?
Well, it's significant enough for that studies have shown that, obviously there is this inverted U effect. So it's not right.
So kind of what I'm after is, if I take 200 milligrams and I sit on my couch versus I take 200 milligrams and I go in and I do a high neurological workout, how would those two things compare? You see what I'm saying? Like as far as the sympathetic stimulus.
Well, yeah. So as far as the sympathetic stimulus, the condition where you be taking caffeine prior to training, while you're training, you're going to have a much higher elevation in sympathetic nerve activity. Yeah. Absolutely, because just like I said. Just the fact of thinking of training alone will reset the baroreflex so that your body is set up to operate at a higher sympathetic nerve activity. You got to remember the body actually has this baroreflex. So these baroreceptors or stretch receptors in your carotid bodies and your aortic arch that sense changes in pressure. And so anytime we have a increase in blood pressure when we're resting, our body will the hypothalamus will actually serve to withdraw sympathetic nerve activity so that we actually can buffer that blood pressure response. Mm-hmm. So we actually have natural receptors in our body that will buffer blood pressure issues, and that prevails in all the sympathetic nerve activity in the body. Where the problem comes in is that a lot of athletes and bodybuilders generally are in a mental state of anxiety because they've worked themselves up before they go training. So that blood pressure response is actually higher to start with. Secondly, this is a little bit of a generalization, but there are a number of large bodybuilders that are walking around with high blood pressure under resting conditions.
Sure.
So they've already had some sort of neurological reset, likely a neurological reset of their baroreflex. And it's likely because of this drive, this drive to achieve, to constantly be killing it. So
right, but constantly being able to kill it in the gym is one thing, but constantly being able to kill it, when you're in your car or when you're at home is probably a little bit of a different thing, right? I think no one will argue that. Yeah, that 2 hours you're in the gym, do whatever you got to do to get it done, but spend the rest of your time. I could be completely wrong, but spend the rest of your time focusing on parasympathetic stimulation.
And that's precisely what I'm getting at. We need to start thinking that yes, it's great to be in this fight or flight response while we're training, and our body, like I said, is naturally adapted to do that. Just think, like if you go in an MRI, for example, Ben, if you go in an MRI and you think of exercising, okay, the cardiovascular centers in your upper cerebrum, like in your brain, will actually light up just like they do when you exercise. So if you think of exercise, they will light up. And they are associated.
Your blood pressure will go up, meaning your blood pressure goes up and your sympathetic goes up?
Yes, it will. Yep.
Wow.
So if you have a peroneal nerve stick in your peroneal nerve, so you're measuring muscle sympathetic nerve activity, and you're all hooked up to EKG and you've got your blood pressure monitors and everything else, you will have a pressor response or a blood pressure response that looks like you're exercising just by thinking of it. And so they've done these studies that hypnotize people in MRIs, in functional MRIs, and actually measured all these things. And that's how we know that we can reset the baroreflex. And that's why we're allowed to operate at these high levels during training. our body will allow us to do that. There's no, the reflexive actions of the baroreflex don't stop us from doing that. Where the problem is that although these things seem involuntary, we can train ourselves to be in a state of panic all the time. So that's, and I know just anecdotally from, my 30 years in this industry of competing and everything, that generally speaking, the successful athletes are the ones that walk around like they are literally going to explode all the time.
So, I find the opposite. And I say this, having been around some of the top pros in the world, I find the top pros to be the most laid back. Like guys who are really good bodybuilders are not high strung from, maybe like the guys who make it to a high level of amateur who are just taking way too much gear. But the guys who are high level pros, man, these guys are never on time. These guys are on their own schedule. They got nowhere to be. We'll get there when we get there. Sorry, man, I can't do that right now. I got to eat. There's no anxiety. There's no stress. And that's why I believe they're there.
Yeah, no. I mean, I would debate that these guys are super intense.
Okay.
Now you want to know what? I agree. There has to be a degree of level-headedness in order to succeed at a professional level in any sport. That, in fact, like I was a professional motocrosser for several years, and my anxiety is what destroyed my career. It was injury essentially that I failed and ended up having to quit. But it was my anxiety was the reason why I couldn't beat certain competitors at certain tracks, and that is strictly a fight or flight response where you're not operating optimally because you're in a level of panic. What I'm saying is the intensity of these guys, the intensity of these pro athletes is at a level that's generally speaking much higher than what you see in the amateur athletes. Now, you mentioned gear and all these kind of things, and that's actually one other area that I was going to talk to you about, is that anabolic steroids are known to increase sympathetic drive. So this is another interesting facet, and this is actually a well-known fact in the area that I study, because we're big on the looking at sex differences in blood pressure regulation and in cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
And one thing we do know, and there's actually a current study in medicine and science, sport and exercise, that showed that anabolic steroid users had nearly 50% greater muscle sympathetic nerve activity and actually equally diminished blood flow responses compared to similarly trained natural athletes.
So is that like their peak, like their amplitude of a sympathetic stimulus, or is that the mean?
Yeah. So we measured a few different ways when we measure muscle sympathetic nerve activity. So we use amplitude as one of the measures. Another one is nerve frequency. So without going into a huge in-depth discussion on how sympathetic nerves fire, basically the way a sympathetic nerve releases catecholamines or releases its neurotransmitters is through both the amplitude of the nerve spike, so how big that spike is, and how frequent that spike is. So how often it bursts. So in the case of anabolic steroid use, actually we see there's been studies showing increases in both. So you see more baroreflex mediated sympathetic nerve bursts, and you also see a greater amplitude in those bursts. Now we also know males in general, like without anabolic steroids being involved, males versus females, this case exists, and we know it's at least partially due to the fact that estrogen will diminish sympathetic activity, and that's what protects premenopausal women from these cardiovascular complications that we see with heightened sympathetic nerve activity. So not only does estrogen diminish it, but testosterone augments it. So these habits that we have of trying to elevate testosterone and blunt estrogen in bodybuilding is also another drive to increase sympathetic nerve activity.
So one question that's kind of an aside, is there any benefit to an increased amplitude of sympathetic drive? So, if someone has a really tremendous ability to get, short-term acute sympathetic drive, would that be inherent benefit in athletic performance, or would that be more likely to cause some type of burnout or stress?
Well, actually, if you look at high caliber athletes, so Olympic level athletes, especially Olympic level like sprinters and these kind of guys, their catecholamine responses or sympathetic responses happen quite robustly and quickly. So their amplitude's very high. They also get high frequency stimulation. But as soon as the stress is gone, as soon as whatever exercise stimulus you give them is gone, it drops right off.
Beautiful.
Right.
Yep.
So we do know that having this ability to ramp the sympathetic nervous system up quickly and then bring it back down is an advantage to athletes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that's based purely on just measuring it in these athletes. And we do know that people with PTSD that don't perform really well, they can ramp it up nice and high and get it there just like the athletes, but it stays elevated for several hours after the stimulus. And that's even if it's a stimulus that's not should be perceived as a psychological stress. So I'll give you an example. When I was at Yale University, I had a side project I was doing with a doctor named Anne Rasmussen, and she was at the VA, and she worked with basically high-level military men that had PTSD. And what we found was if we did a VO2 max test on just a regular athlete, we would get a huge spike in Neuropeptide Y that stayed up while the test was going on. And as soon as it dropped off, then so did the Neuropeptide Y levels in the blood. Mm-hmm. Whereas these high-caliber, like Green Beret, high-caliber Navy SEAL type guys, they'd come in, they'd get on the bikes, and sure enough, they'd get the same spike in Neuropeptide Y. But then when they were finished, you could measure for several hours afterwards the same level of Neuropeptide Y in the blood. So they were not recovering from that sympathetic stimulus like the athletes were. And so although they could perform decent in the context of performance, physical performance, their psychological performance afterward was severely diminished. So you can see how we do want to get the sympathetic nervous system to respond properly, but we do want to actually be able to bring it back down. The best way to do that is to counter it with parasympathetic nerve activity exercises.
So what would be the best way to, besides like an exercise, if we have someone who just came out of the gym, would it be to take something that's going to stimulate, neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin to try and bring them out of that state? Or is it focusing more on like mental meditation stuff, trying to bring your brainwave level down? Like how would someone go about doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's not a whole heck of a lot of, I haven't done a heck of a lot of research in that area, but I would say you could probably do both. We do know that any mindfulness activities, so meditation, these kind of things, we do know that you can augment parasympathetic neuroactivity immensely. So we talk about the autonomic nervous system being completely involuntary, but if the nice part is that, as I told you, the upper cerebrum can interact with the hypothalamus to change these responses. So we've all done this, I'm sure. If you're sitting there and you're anxious, try breathing exercises. So and then they've shown that just 6 deep breaths can actually lower heart rate by several points, and that lowers blood pressure. The same with doing meditation. Meditation has been shown to actually augment parasympathetic neuroactivity, and all the physical variables that we measure to show that, like heart rate variability, heart rate, blood pressure, they all seem to kind of normalize when we do this stuff. So although it would seem counterintuitive to your intensity and gains, thinking about these exercises after training would definitely benefit a number of different athletes.
So we don't know what kind of the catalyst is to stimulate the parasympathetic. Is it breathing, or does it start with the neurochemical cascade first? Like, is there an order of operations when it comes to parasympathetic? Is it like, the nervous system gets the stimulus and then the neurochemistry happens, or right? That would make sense.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, because our amygdala is kind of our gateway to this perception.
Yeah.
Really, honestly, it starts with your upper cerebrum. It starts with your perception, because you got to remember, Ben, like we're not evolutionarily wise. Like, all these systems are put in place to get away from, like I said, bears and woolly mammoths and these kind of things.
Yeah.
Well, they don't exist anymore. In fact, just getting ready for this talk, my hands start sweating, my heart rate goes up, these kind of things, right?
Sure.
Although I know you're a nice guy. And I know that you're not going to.
No, I'm not, man. Come on.
and I know no one's going to reach through my headphones and pull my brains out of my ears, right?
Right.
Yet I'm having a response that I perceive these responses as important enough to, probably have high catecholamine levels. Likely a bit of cortisol has been squirted out of the old into the system. So. So it's really perception. It begins with perception, and that's why.
I love that you brought that up.
Yeah,
I love that you brought that up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of the mindfulness activities that people hear about begin with how you perceive your threats. So are you able?
I've been getting some attention around the idea of, like, well, Ben, why are you changing? You're still this muscle building guy. Why are you changing so much of your conversation toward the mindfulness aspect? Mm-hmm. And I love that this is coming full circle, man, because people just don't get how much of an influence this perception in the amygdala is really the governing factor on their ability to build muscle and lose fat. Looking back at my career, had I been aware of this stuff, I really believe my journey would have been massively accelerated and probably prolonged, ultimately less injuries and, probably a lot faster to get there. Had I been aware of the reality that, every time you walk into the gym, if you're, every bodybuilder in the world, and we talked about this off air, Dwayne, was every bodybuilder in the world has this like negative, angry persona every time they go into the gym. They feel like they have to be an asshole, or they have to, like maybe they're stressed about getting the workout done. That was my thing, man. I had such a high level of demand on myself. I was stressed every workout I did because I put such a high level of expectations around what I need to accomplish every day. And if anybody got in the way, I'd be stressed. I'd be pissed. So, but changing that perception now has literally shifted everything around my workouts, man. Like, I'm enjoying workouts. I love laughing and having fun during my workouts. I love training with somebody, not because, they're going to slow me down or make me better, but because we can joke around and be kind of goofy and have fun and have a smile on your face.
Absolutely. And it's kind of funny too, because as all of us get older, and I'm much older than you are, but as we get older in this career, we actually become our perception changes over time, but we also become hyperaginergic or hypersympathetic. So just healthy aging alone will drive sympathetic nerve activity, and that's part of the consequence of aging on the cardiovascular system, because there's a whole laundry list of deleterious effects of elevated sympathetic nerve activity. And that's what I study in my lab. I don't study the actual performance benefits so much, because it's hard to get funded on that stuff. But I'm looking at the actual health consequences.
Hey guys, I interrupt this podcast to bring you a special announcement from ATP Labs. We are giving away a ATP Lab prize pack this week to one special winner who leaves us a review on iTunes. So head over to iTunes, because I want to give you supplements. ATP has the best quality supplements on the planet, literally every third-party accreditation that we could have, and I want to hook you guys up. So head over to iTunes right now, leave us a review, share the podcast with someone who you think would love it, and I'm going to pick one winner every week to win a special ATP prize pack, and we will be announcing it on this show. Producer Trevor is going to let you guys know. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. So, can you tell me more about Neuropeptide Y? Because I think that seems like it's a huge, at least area of discussion, because if it's remaining elevated and these people are maintaining too much sympathetic tone, and maybe if we can mitigate Neuropeptide Y, there may be some opportunity there to mitigate the sympathetic nervous system. Is that something that you've thought about?
Absolutely. So one of the things people have to understand, and that's why I kind of put this at the front end, was that the sympathetic nervous system is not evil. Like I said, it's operating all the time, and it has health, and it does have its healthy effects. That's, like I said, that's why, like, a proper operating sympathetic nervous system is why I can go from laying down to standing without passing out. Right. And an improperly functioning autonomic nervous system or sympathetic nervous system is why a lot of females will get up out of bed and then black out and fall down. So we do need these nice rapid sympathetic responses to buffer a lot of our environmental stresses that aren't psychological. In terms of Neuropeptide Y, I became very interested in Neuropeptide Y because of its pleiotropic effects, or its many effects it has in the body. So when Neuropeptide Y is released from sympathetic nerves, it's actually a very potent vasoconstrictor. So it allows us to maintain blood pressure quite well. And it's broken down by enzymatic processes. And when the enzymes break down Neuropeptide Y, they actually become active on other receptors that aren't involved in blood pressure regulation. So Neuropeptide Y is involved in the alcoholism response. It's involved in feeding responses. It's involved in blood pressure regulation. It's involved in cellular maintenance of tissues because it's a mitogen. So there's all these kind of maintenance effects that it has in the body. And when Neuropeptide Y gets elevated and stays elevated, it's part of the mandate in my lab is to show that these elevations actually produce more deleterious effects. So one of the things we've shown is actually Neuropeptide Y is tightly involved in the stress response, the cancer-related stress responses. We've all heard that stress can cause cancer. Well, a few years ago we isolated the receptor that kind of links stress to cancer, and that's the Neuropeptide Y5 receptor. And so what we found is in females that have familial histories of breast cancer and these kind of things, they have a variant in this Neuropeptide Y gene that enables them to release more MPY than most other female cohorts. And this actually produces a problem with increased proliferation of cancer cells, increased angiogenesis, and increased tumor burden. So generally speaking, Neuropeptide Y is kind of a neat one because it shows you that, when it's in balance, when things are operating properly and you don't have too much of it around, it's doing everything perfectly. The minute you start to get high levels of it sitting around when it shouldn't be, then you start seeing these disease states. So not only
looked at anything, have we ever looked at anything enzymatically, like understanding the process or the pathway and how it breaks down and how we can influence it?
Yep, absolutely. And there's been a lot of conflicting studies on what to do with it. So for my studies, looking at peripheral NPY and its effects on blood vessels, there's a enzyme called dipeptidyl peptidase 4, or DPPIV, and that enzyme actually truncates the Neuropeptide Y molecule into a fragment, and that fragment then binds to Neuropeptide Y5 receptors and Y2 receptors as opposed to Y1 receptors. Overall, what that does is that enzymatic cleavage makes it not so vascularly active, but makes it active on other receptors, like I said, in the breast cancer situation and these kind of things. So one thing we've shown is that males actually, under resting conditions, use MPY quite abundantly to maintain constriction of blood vessels, whereas females don't. Females have a lot of that enzyme available that break it down. Now, that same enzyme has actually been implicated in diabetic states and these kind of things in the gut. So just wiping the enzyme out actually may help in one area, but then will probably throw off another area. So it's all about this balance. The sympathetic nervous system is a tricky one to play with because of this, the fact that it's all a balance.
What's the catalyst for Neuropeptide Y? Is Neuropeptide Y stimulated by the release of norepinephrine, or what's the known stimulus of that?
Yeah, so there's a few
just
different.
A result of it going up.
Well, the dogma, there's a few different dogmas.
Okay.
The early work, before I was old enough to do a PhD, people were really focused on noradrenaline and norepinephrine,
Yep.
coming from sympathetic nerves, and that was kind of the primary transmitter. Now we know that norepinephrine and ATP and neuropeptide Y are all released from sympathetic nerves. And where the controversy lies is whether they're released together as co-transmitters or whether they're released in different vesicles at different times under different nerve frequencies. So my work actually shows that neuropeptide Y is released under all conditions, baseline right up to high stress. And because it's such a potent transmitter, it actually can produce similar constrictive effects and sympathetic effects that norepinephrine does, but at like 3 orders of magnitude less concentration.
Wow.
So it's very potent. So one of the things I'm pushing is that our understanding of neuropeptide Y is kind of naive at this point because our assays weren't sensitive enough to detect it in the early days. And so that's why we thought it wasn't doing anything until you're really stressed out. Well, all the work that I've done for the past decade has shown that neuropeptide Y actually does a whole heck of a lot under regular conditions, regular resting conditions. It's just that the levels of it are so low that people generally can't measure it when they're using traditional assays.
So, man, start walking us down the route of what this means to people in the gym and how they should be perhaps allowing this information they now know to influence the way they look at their training or the way they plan their training or the way they train on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking that, we have all these conditions that are driving sympathetic nerve activity up. And like I said, during your workouts, it's probably beneficial to be a little aggressive and a little on edge.
Absolutely.
But so starting with caffeine, I would say, limit your caffeine to a level that's manageable. So if you're kind of like wondering if you should take the last couple sips of your pre-workout, or you're going to lose your mind, or if you have to shut, and this has happened to me, that's why I've taken some pre-workouts, with DMAA and all those things in it, that I have to take my headphones off because I start to feel panicky. If you're feeling like that, back off. Okay.
Sure.
Secondly, understand that if you're using anabolic steroids or any of these kind of things, there's a high likelihood that you have high blood pressure and your sympathetic drive's up. So you may
not need pre-workouts, right?
You may not need pre-workouts, and you also should be considering some countermeasures for that. So meditation, breathing exercises, these kind of things. Now, I'm not an expert in meditation. I only just started using it in the last couple of years because as I got older, my anxiety is starting to get pretty interesting. But I've also, but you want to know what? I've also noticed that I've managed to fix it with it. So yeah, start being mindful, start incorporating some of these yoga type activities into your training, and you'll probably find that your gains go up. Yeah. Another thing that increases sympathetic drive is overeating, which is what a lot of us as bodybuilders have done or do.
So before you go into that,
Yep.
Dwayne, can you talk a little bit about that feeling that you say, getting a little sketchy when you take too much pre-workouts, just so people understand, is that exclusively from overstimulated sympathetic nervous system?
Yes.
Because I mean, people are kind of I think they misunderstand what that is, and the reality is that all it is?
That's pretty much what it is. Yes.
Okay.
You're when you're feeling sketchy, what you've done is you've gone into that inverted U portion of the stimulant response. No different than when people take illicit drugs, right? And they become paranoid. That's literally from overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. Absolutely. Yeah. So we know
going back into overeating.
Yes, so that's counterproductive. So if you can kind of back off on the stimulants, right? Be a little more mindful. Watch your overeating. Overeating, one of the hypotheses behind obesity and the effects of obesity on increased sympathetic nerve activity, which occurs, is the fact that overeating activates thermogenesis. We know that. But the problem is this is at the price of sympathetic nervous system activation of the heart. So we know that people with hypertension and obesity, and not everybody's hypertensive that's obese, but people that are hypertensive tend to have heightened sympathetic nerve activity. And this is exacerbated when they consume large amounts of food. So if you're one of these people that feels your heart bounding after you've eaten a large meal, we call this the meat sweats and this kind of stuff, then maybe you should think about backing off a little bit on the size of each individual meal and spreading it out over the day.
Great advice.
That would be my advice.
Great advice.
Sleep deprivation, well, there's another one. That drives sympathetic nerve activity through the roof, and that's probably the main cause of why people lose gains when they are sleep deprived. The body goes into a state of anxiety. You end up with this high blood sugar levels, and you're dieting, but you can't lose any weight. And this doesn't make any sense to me because I'm only eating 1,500 calories. Generally speaking, it's because your body's taking all your amino acids and producing glucose out of them because it's in a state of shock. So be careful with sleep deprivation. It's pretty tough. And that brings me into sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is another one that bodybuilders generally have. So for those people, my advice on this one I usually give to people is if you're having dreams that you're trapped and can't speak, and then you wake up either screaming or gasping or yelling, you have sleep apnea. And during these conditions of hypoxia and hypercapnia, we end up getting this huge or low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. We get a huge sympathetic drive, and that is the link between sleep apnea and cardiovascular complications.
Interesting.
So you can see all these things that are associated with large, massive gains tend to drive sympathetic nerve activity. So again, be sensitive to what your body's feeling, and try to incorporate some countermeasures to get that parasympathetic nervous system to counter this.
Right. So that's kind of where I want to dive before we move on. Is like, what are our measures? Obviously, other than meditation and breathing, supplementally to start influencing the parasympathetic. So have you seen any supplements that actually have a positive benefit on parasympathetic tone?
It's nothing conclusive at the moment. In fact, I would say this area's this idea is new enough, and there's only if you Google it, there's a few people thinking the same thing, but it's new enough that I don't think anybody's jumped on board yet. It's pretty difficult, I think, to convince people at this point that that chilling out is going to make you grow.
Yeah.
So it's going to.
I'll tell you what. As someone who's been at the top of the bodybuilding world, I'll tell you definitively, like, people need to start understanding this stuff because
absolutely.
I was just as guilty as everybody else, man. There was a period where I was doing 3 workouts a day, and I was like, why am I not growing? And why my joints are getting sore, and I'm really tired, and like, why am I not getting leaner? I'm training 3 times a day, eating 2,000 calories, and like, you idiot. Like, looking back on it now, right? You're like, man, it's great to push the envelope and overreach at some level, but you got to realize that's a short-term adaptation, and you have to really look at, okay, now I need a substantial increase in parasympathetic activity. So I did the New York Pro in 2010, and I was literally training 2 to 3 times a day every day for 6 months. And I took 2 weeks off the gym afterwards and went to Mexico. And when I came back, I looked like a fucking superhero.
Well, you know what's funny? And how many times has that ever happened, right? Probably after 100% of my shows, I would guarantee you the week after, I said, man, I wish I stepped on stage. I wish I cut my water and stepped on stage now. And that's because
some guys almost plan that, right? Some guys plan that. I'm going to do a show next week, but and I'm guilty as anybody else. It's almost impossible psychologically to take your foot off the gas pedal when you're 2 weeks out from a contest, right? You're like,
absolutely.
Man, I can't slow down. Like you need to slow down. You're like, man, I know I need to relax. But who in their right mind is going to go, hey man, I'm getting ready for the biggest show of my life. I'm going to not train for a couple days now. Like, I've never met a human being who, especially a competitive athlete, who's going to go, oh, yeah, I'm cool with just taking 4 or 5 days off now. I know I'm going to feel better. I know it's going to make work way better for me. It's this psychological, dichotomy we're living in. It's like, we know we need to, but I'm not willing to do it, or I've never been willing to do it, but that's ultimately what we need, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest problems right now is is perception, because we are promoting this high level of anxiety in every aspect of our training and rest, and so people are generally thinking that this is what you need to do to grow. And so it's going to take this paradigm shift, and these kind of podcasts and articles and these type of things to get people to start thinking on the other side, because this is opposing thought. Like even as far as like blood flow restriction exercise, like people are doing this stuff like mad, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what's funny is blood flow restriction actually causes increased sympathetic drive.
Sure, of course it does. Blood pressure
right?
manipulation.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Well, because what you're doing is you're trapping all those metabolites.
Sure.
in your muscle, and then you activate chemosensitive muscle afferents that drive sympathetic nerve activity up, because the body is then going to increase perfusion pressure to flush those metabolites out. So we're creating all kinds of conditions that we train our perception to think this is how we grow. So think about that. You've got this. I did blood flow restriction training on the weekend. Puked my guts out. You got these tourniquets on, right? You're training and your heart rate. You can feel your heart rate start to bound. Like you can feel it.
Sure.
And what you're saying to yourself is, I'm doing blood flow restriction training. Feel my heart going like this. I'm freaking giving her. I'm really like, I'm intense, man. I'm getting the gains, and it's that mindset that is driving us to think that as long as we can feel that heart jamming away in our chest, then we're doing something. And
it's the badge of honor, man. I'm crushing it today. Hashtag killed it, man.
That's exactly. So one of the things we need to start doing is, like kill it at the gym, but then chill out after the gym. And that is the key. I believe it's the key. And I think we're going to see, I think we'll, in North America, we are the most stressed out nation.
Sure.
But we're also the biggest guys, right? We have the biggest bodybuilders here.
Yep.
And so, not to discount any of the mass monsters that are around the world, but I mean, in terms of like general population, there's a lot of guys here.
People ask me that all the time, why I think that is. And I really believe it's due to the athletic history, So like, as far as neurological ability to adapt to a new athletic endeavor, right? These kids grow up in the U.S. and from the time they're like 4 years old, they're superstar athletes doing really diverse exercise. Their ability of the nervous system to kind of pick up a new activity is really highly advanced. So as soon as they transition into something like muscle building, they grow right away because there's no learning curve. They just pick it up and like, hey, I squat right away, I bench right away. There's no learning curve. Whereas you get guys who get to 18 years old in Europe and they've never lifted a weight before. The only thing they've done is play soccer. And then all of a sudden, like, I want to be a bodybuilder. Well, dude, it's going to take you 3 years to learn how to execute these movements.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's exactly my thoughts too. That and the access we have to food.
Sure. Yeah.
We have a great access to protein, and so we can plow ourselves full of protein. We got great training facilities and great training, great athletic facilities, and so that allows us to get there. But I think with a little more mindfulness and thinking about these, this whole rest to digest anabolic system. We should be able to actually push our levels even higher.
Yeah, completely agree, man. So when it comes to cardio, like high intensity cardio, how does this come into play? Because obviously, we hear the argument that slow intensity cardio is going to drive cortisol up, and that's pretty definitive, or at least we think. High intensity cardio we know is obviously going to drive cortisol up, but maybe that's more acute. What's your perspective on when to incorporate these things, especially for someone who's getting ready for a contest, right? Is like I'm training every day, or I'm training twice a day, I'm in a calorically depleted state. Should people even be doing cardio at that point? Well, from a neurological perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's actually funny you ask that, because I do an hour of cardio a day actually to keep my mental health in check.
Well, that's one thing, man. So that's what I said to everybody. People said, I do an hour of cardio every day. I did it every day when I was dieting because I actually like it, man. I throw in an audio book. I meditate. I feel awesome when I'm done. I jump in the sauna for half an hour when I'm done. I feel great. Whereas most people go, man, I got to do cardio today, and they're bitching about it. And that's a very different place to be.
Yeah. So again, I honestly believe it's perception. Like it depends on how you perceive the stimulus. For me, cardio is a way of life. It wasn't when I'm in my younger years. But now in my older years, I do a minimum of an hour a day. And if I don't do that, then I find that my anxiety levels are much higher during the
Sure.
day.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, although it may, it might not be conducive to gains. I have to put those aside because if I don't keep my mental health in check, then I'm not going to have any gains anyway. So.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you what, I feel better definitively. If I get out there and do an hour of cardio, you get uncomfortable for the first 15 or 20 minutes. And then once you pass 20 minutes, you're grooving, man. You feel great. You're in this great mental state. You're probably getting endorphin release. You feel like you've got a sense of accomplishment.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. And then your day just goes better. It's all, I say the same about meditation. Anytime you sit down to meditate, the first 15 minutes is like, torture, right? You're like, you want to move, everything's itchy, you got aches and pains, your back hurts, your groin hurts. And all of a sudden you kind of settle into it, and then you kind of wake up, you come to, and it's been an hour. You're like, oh shit, the first 10 minutes really sucked, but the last 45 has been great. So, I think that's where the people need to realize that's where the true benefit lies in everything you do is does it suck at first? Of course it does. That's the crux of life, right? That's the reality. And then moving on from there, once you can get past the shitty part, then that's where the really benefit happens.
Well, it's funny you actually said that because the shitty part is the part where the neurochemistry hasn't caught up.
Yeah.
And then the good part where you're really like, yeah, man, I'm in the groove. That groove is actually when you've got all those neurotransmitters are coming in, all the hormones are in your blood now, and that's actually what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, I mean, if people can just if we can
talk about that a little bit.
Talk
about that a little bit, Dr. Jackson. So, like when you say the neurochemical stuff is happening, what exactly is happening? Is just the endorphins or?
Yeah. So I mean, in a general sense, right? When you initiate a cardiovascular exercise, because it's not the stress of cardiovascular exercise, at least the way we do it as bodybuilders,
sure, is
not so intense. Then it takes a while for all your systems to kind of ramp up, and so that's your endorphins, and the endorphins include getting adrenaline and those kind of things circulating in the blood. And because if you're doing, say, for example, like steady state, low intensity cardio, the reason why it takes a while to feel good is because it takes a while for your blood sugar levels to drop low enough that your body starts actually mobilizing fats through sympathetic neuroactivity increases. And through the mobilization of those fats, in an effort to get those fats mobilized, you have to have some circulating adrenaline. So that kind of gives you that feel-good situation,
right?
When you're doing your training. If you're doing high-intensity intervals, then that's going to come much quicker because obviously the intensity is higher, so you're going to do more work per unit time. There's not really much magic involved in these things. It's just differential hormonal responses based on the intensity of the exercise.
Mm-hmm. So what is your training done now that you know all this stuff? What does it look like and how you train differently?
So I used to be one of those no pain, no gain kind of guys. In fact, I have tattoos on me that pretty much say that. And after a couple of biceps tears that I had to have reinserted into the bones and 4 knee reconstructions, I realized that if I want to keep training into my 40s, then I'm going to have to start training a little differently. So what it actually enabled me to do is I started following some of the stuff that you talked about with kind of slow controlled movements, time under tension, that kind of stuff, which allowed me to drop the weight a little bit, and I actually became much more mindful during my workouts, so I could actually dig deeper to get a more intensity, yet without the heavy weight. So that helps a lot.
That sounds like music to my ears, man.
Yeah, and honestly, it's the only reason why I can train now.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of fatiguing sets at the beginning where I do 30 reps, 40 reps, and then I move into slow, controlled time under tension. But as well, I've incorporated daily cardio into my regimen, and that's mainly because I was leaving the gym. I loved leaving the gym in a complete panicky state all the way through my 20s and 30s. it was a thing for me. It was
like your badge of honor. Like, I feel like I had a really good workout kind of thing.
Yeah, basically driving home like I own the road and I'm self-righteous and everybody can go fuck themselves.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But the problem I had with that was that as I got older, my mental state couldn't handle that because you get busy with the jobs that I have. I have 3 careers. I write for many magazines. I got the whole caged muscle thing going on. And then I've got a medical school professor thing going down. And I realized that I can't operate at that level. I will die.
Yeah.
I had a few health scares that kind of threw me off my course. And so since then I've been like, hey, if I want to keep training and stay in shape, then I'm gonna have to start being a lot more mindful. And it's funny because in doing that, my physique has changed for the better.
Sure it has.
I'm not as big as I used to be. I used to be 260. I used to be a big guy.
Right.
But honestly, my balance and everything else is like leaps and bounds better than it ever has been.
Right. Can you talk about some of the mistakes you made that maybe people out there are making right now that you would advise them against, including the abuse of pre-workouts?
Yeah, you want to know what? Absolutely. So I mean, I was from I grew up with the Dorian Yates days with handfuls of Ultimate Orange was the pre-workout.
Yeah, sure.
And handfuls of ephedrine throughout the day. And I would definitely say that what limited me from becoming a pro was definitely running around in a hyperadrenergic state. I was not getting the benefits from my workouts that I should have been getting because I was literally walking around in a stress condition the whole time.
Right.
Once I was diagnosed with hypertension and these kind of things in my late 30s, getting ready for my last show, that's when I started making these mindful changes. And honestly, my biggest mistakes were probably over stimulation before training, under relaxation after training, and not enough sleep.
Yep.
And that was all kind of probably due to stimulation.
I'll tell you, like, I had someone come into my life in my early 20s who literally just said, hey, man, if you want to be a pro bodybuilder, you got to learn to chill out. And it was a girl, and like I was type A personality, man, like trying to start businesses. I was working as a personal trainer 10 hours a day. I was working at a club at night, like, driving a nice car, driving too fast. I was that guy, right? And then she just goes, hey, if you want to put on more muscle, she knew nothing about building muscle. She goes, I think you probably just want to learn to relax. And it just in my brain clicked one day, and I go, I got to learn to take more days off. I got to learn to relax. I got to learn to slow down. And that was kind of like my, I think the catalyst in why I became a successful bodybuilder is because I had that conscious realization that if you want to be successful at this, you need to do everything in your power to not do anything.
So you want to know what? You're lucky. You had a couple lucky breaks there because one, you had a girl that was willing to tell you that.
Yeah.
And secondly, you actually listened to them because to tell you the truth, I probably would have just told them to go, toss it, and I'll be fine.
Well, that's the way I felt at first. But I mean, I was also frustrated with my gains, right? I was like, man, I'm not growing as fast as I want. My body composition maybe isn't where I want it to be. And I think that was wise because maybe I was seeking, and then somebody said something. I'm like, you're exactly because I know about the cortisol, I know about the sympathetic dominance, I know about it, but until somebody points it out to you, it's hiding in plain sight thing. It's like I know it's what it was, but until somebody pointed it out to me, I just need someone to say it, and I was like, oh, you're so right. So from that point on, it was like I never worked on Sundays, and I always made sure I had those days off, and I made sure after I trained, I always took it. I tried to take a nap or like whatever it was. I cut back on my clients. I made less money, but I was able to be a successful bodybuilder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, and then that is the key. I think probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give any young and up and coming bodybuilder is to literally avoid overdoing everything, because that seems to be kind of the flavor in bodybuilding. Now the millennials, I watch a lot of them now with my socials and everything else, and they seem to be actually a little more. They seem to run a little more on the upper cerebrum, a little less on the brainstem than I did in the 90s.
That's good.
So they're listening. It looks like they're listening. You can see them training smart. A lot of them are training a lot more smart. And that's one of the things that I as I went through, it was more of a just run on grit.
Sure.
And what I've learned in my older age, that running on grit is a temporary athletic career.
Yeah, it's a
and I've had a
fast
couple
track to a
of temporary.
quick end.
That's right. It's a fast track to a quick end, and you know, and when you're in these sports, a lot of bodybuilders are always into aggressive sports. So for, you know, with motocross, for me, that was my big sport.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I could have probably lasted a lot longer had I have engaged my brain when I put my helmet on. How's that?
Sure. Yeah.
So you know, and I mean, it's so like I said, a lot of this is perception. If you can get the right perception in your life, then you'll probably be very successful in this game. If your perception is that, you know, it's do or die, you know, win at all costs, you know, burn all bridges and just get to the end, chances are you'll probably do okay, but you'll probably do it with a lot of injury and probably not a lot of people like you at the end.
Yeah, man, there's definitely a lot of people out there doing that, right? They're like, you know,
Yep.
and I'll tell you what, man, I was guilty of it too. At some point, I had these blinders on, and I was so focused on, hey, man, this is what I got to do, and I don't care who gets in my way. And, you know, I'd meet girls, and I'd say, listen, this is my job, and this is my life, and if you can make me better, great. If not, there's the door. And that was just the reality.
Absolutely.
You know? And it made me successful, and it probably, you know, thank goodness I was able to get into bodybuilding with complete health. But had I kept going at that rate, you know, I was blessed by having 2 children, and that really taught me to kind of stop and smell the roses. But I think had I kept going at that rate, like so many other guys, I would have shortened my life, man. So, you know, I'm very grateful that you're the guy having this conversation and teaching people about it. And I'll do my best to continue to spread the word of, you know, what I just refer to as intelligent muscle building, which is like, hey, man, it's going to require more than just hard work. You know, if your only solution out there is, hey, I'm going to work harder than everybody else, you're fucked. You're going to end up
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, your only solution.
Yep.
I mean, you're going to, 1, end up running into huge plateaus. 2, you're going to run into huge health problems.
Yep. And that's the name of the game, right? Like this life is all about making it to the end. And you know, as we know, with a lot of the young bodybuilders and not so young bodybuilders that are dropping off the earth now, it's time for us to start thinking a little more holistically and we'll probably benefit muscularly for it.
That's exactly it. Yeah, even if it's not like I'll play the long game thing. It's like, hey, I want to play the right game. Like you can improve your body composition and build muscle just by learning to just take a few minutes a day to stimulate that parasympathetic, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Exactly.
Awesome. Yep. Dr. Dwayne, thank you so much, man. I'm very grateful for you. I think this is a massively enlightening conversation, and I'd love to have you back to talk more about it. And I'm definitely coming down to London to perform one of these microsurgeries.
I would love for you to come by, and Ben, I thank you immensely for inviting me to talk with you. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, man. We're definitely going to connect again soon. Thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you love it, give us a share, leave us a review on iTunes. You can also access the show notes at benpakulski.com/podcasts. Head on over there and leave us a review as well. And I hope you guys enjoy it. Have an awesome day. Building muscles, building minds. I love you guys. Peace out.